found the Duterte, Marcos, and Biden administration guilty of violation of international humanitarian law and war crimes. For the first time since arriving back in the United States, Brandon has traveled outside the San Francisco Bay Area and speaking on the Fight Like Brandon Lee, a speaking tour for just peace in the Philippines from April to September of this year. And we are honored for Brandon to be joining us today as our keynote speaker. So let us all welcome Brandon Lee.
Kakatwa ke kakapsa, kaibag at sapa, ke nabara kapalao. Comrades and friends, good morning and warm greetings. Thank you for that introduction. Why am I here keynoting today? I can only speak as one of many victims of US-backed war crimes in the Philippines. I feel extremely privileged to speak to you all about the impacts of US imperialism. How did I find myself working for human rights in the Philippines? It started 23 years ago in 2001 when the US invaded Afghanistan. I was a student at City College of San Francisco. When I joined the anti-war protests, I knew that I could not just sit back, seeing families, women, and children suffer because of the US war for oil and profits in the Middle East. In that protest against Afghanistan war, I was attracted to the Sea of Red shirts with the slogan, serve the people. It was the Mayan USA contingent, Filipino migrant workers, students, and women who were leading the lively contingent, along with other Asian migrants and Asian American activists that drew my attention, united under the banner of the Asian Pacific Islander Coalition Against War. At that time, the Philippines was declared the second front on the war on terror. And the Filipino groups mobilized with other people of the global south to have a united anti-war and anti-imperialist stance against the US invasion in Afghanistan and a year later in Iraq. It was during these years that I learned how interconnected our struggles are, and I became an internationalist and anti-imperialist. In 2007, I went on a life-changing exposure trip with the League of Filipino Students to the Philippines. I joined the workers boycotting Nestle on their picket line to fight for living wages and better working conditions. COP4, the chair of their union, was killed in cold blood by state agents. COP4 was dearly loved by the Nestle workers for his leadership in building the union and his ultimate sacrifice. The Nestle workers launched a public campaign There's blood in your coffee to draw international attention against Nestle. Nestle believes that water is a corporate right, not a human right. In this same trip, we visited many sectors, including the most oppressed majority and the largest class, the peasants. I found out that the poor peasants who have been tilling the land for generations did not own their land and instead were paid 10 pesos a day or about a quarter a day. When they collectively protested against these low wages and for the land, the rich landowners had their harpoons raining down bullets. We also visited the Igorot indigenous peoples in the northern part of the Philippines. The Igorots, who live on resource-rich lands, are considered squatters on their own land because the Philippine government considers any land with a slope of 18 degrees, it belongs to the government. The Igorots have been fighting against foreign occupation and colonization for hundreds of years. And until now, they have continued their fight against government neglect, development aggression, militarization, and for the recognition for the right to their ancestral land and self-determination. Development aggression came in the form of large-scale mining, hydropower projects, geothermal projects, and wind farms. Essentially, it means development forced onto the Igorot. On that exposure trip, our group also attended the 1 year death anniversary of Alice Clapper, who was the wife of Chandu Clapper, who was the provincial chair of the Progressive Party, Bayan Mona, and the president of the Provincial Red Cross. Chandu and Alice were driving their kids to school when a motorcycle pulled up and shot the car. Alice shielded her husband and was riddled with multiple bullets. Alice died immediately, but Chandu made it out alive, but was hit in his arm and chest. He could no longer practice as a surgeon, and now he's in Canada under political asylum with his kids. But the family today continues to be traumatized. During this trip, we joined a medical and fact-finding mission to a remote village in Babale, Kalinga. The indigenous peasants taught us about how the soldiers had blindfolded them and pointed a gun to their knee. The soldiers accused the farmers of supporting the land defenders and resistance fighters, known as the New People's Army. The Philippine had recently held the Philippine Army had recently held a medical mission giving out inspiring medicine to the local indigenous people. This trip 17 years ago changed the direction of my life. I believe that we are shaped by our experiences, and this exposure program gave me new direction. It fortified my commitment to serving the fight for the Philippine liberation from US imperialism. 2 years later, in 2009, I decided to deepen my commitment and do a 3 month integration in a remote area deep in the mountains. When I returned, I learned about Melissa Rojas, who is a Filipino American health worker based in the United States. And when she went to the province Tarlac, she she did a health survey with the community and was abducted by state security forces. About 50 men pushed her into a van, tried to gag her, blindfolded her, tortured her for 6 days. They put double cellophane bag around her head, dumped her in the toilet, punched her when she didn't answer their questions. But it was because of the US mass movement, the Canadian mass movements around the world, and the Filipino mass movement that pressured the Philippine government to release her. They thought she was a Canadian. And when they released her, they told her, you better not talk about what happened, or else we'll hurt your family. As a health worker, Melissa diagnosed the Philippine societal problems and saw the illness of neoliberal policies from living among the poor. When she came back to the US, she didn't remain silent. She spoke about what happened and testified to the Philippine Congress. In 2015, she also testified in the International People's Tribunal, like myself this year. Around the same time Melissa was abducted, I went on a search and retrieval mission with the Cordillera Human Rights Alliance and Community Health Education Services and Training in the Cordillera Region, or CHESCOR. Michael Reyes is one of 7 from a poor indigenous family. Foreign mining companies were already destroying the environment and poisoning the water streams in the name of profit around his home. Michael Reyes would end up taking the armed struggle and joined the New People's Army to defend the ancestral land. On a day when the armed forces of the Philippines ambushed his unit, Michael would sacrifice himself to allow his unit to fight another day. He was captured alive. After not gaining any useful information from him, the army would execute him by chopping off his limbs. It was only on the 3rd week that the army granted permission for the community to retrieve his body. By the time we got there, you could not see his skin. Only the maggots and other insects were decomposing his body. I gasped as he was still missing his arm and leg. Supposedly the dogs had scattered his missing limbs. I watched in horror as the doctors, during an autopsy, tried to reconstruct his body. This image and smell would forever be etched in my memory. In 2010, I would move to the Philippines and find my focus in supporting the Igorot self-determination and defense of ancestral land. I was inspired by the widespread, vibrant, fearless mass movement for change in the Philippines, a movement with a vision that is taking collective action to end deep-seated government corruption, to break the system of land dynasties, and distribute land to the hungry tillers, who comprise the majority of the population, provide decent jobs at home so that 4,000 Filipinos don't have to migrate daily just for work and leave their children behind, and basic services to the marginalized. Today, that number is nearly double, and almost 8,000 Filipinos leaving the Philippines daily. In the Cordillera region where I would reside, I was equally inspired and in awe by the vivacious Igorot mass movement and the culture of resistance to the onslaught of imperialist plunder through large-scale mining and destructive energy dam, geothermal, and wind farms, which will further destroy the indigenous communities, including their livelihood, heritage, and communal ethos. They are not against development, but are against corporate business that only seeks to feed pockets of local bureaucrat capitalists, landlords, big bourgeoisie compradors, and foreign corporations. This is not development, but rather business for private profit. It was in joining this struggle that I met my partner and we raised our child. I have met some of the bravest and most selfless freedom fighters from the ranks of the country's poorest, while in the decadence of the country's rich is maintained by a repressive and fascist state under a US-backed puppet regime. No matter who has held the Philippines, they have always kowtowed to foreign interests over the own country and people. I supported the strong opposition against the plunder of Igorot indigenous lands, the violations of their right to self-determination, and state terrorism characterized by militarization, bombings, strafing, criminalization, terrorist tagging, and relentless red tagging, all perpetrated by the US Duterte and now US Marcos regime. I struggled alongside the most courageous indigenous peasants to protect their and defend their agricultural land, mountains, forests, and rivers against corporations conducting widespread aggressive extraction and environmental degradation. When the Igorot indigenous peoples protest this plunder, they are met by the full violence of the Philippine state counterinsurgency program or the whole of the nation approach, which is patterned by our US government. The Philippine government chooses to instead protect big landlords and foreign corporate mining dams and plantations. Because the Cordillera People's Alliance, which the Ifugao Peasant Movement is a member, have been on the forefront of these protests. They were politically vilified and tagged as communists, New People's Army terrorists, and supporters. The political repression caused a chilling effect as political freedom eroded. The communities that were oftentimes militarized bore the brunt of these attacks. IPM leaders in the communities were asked to surrender as NPA rebels and withdraw their membership from the IPM by the state security forces. If they refused, they were threatened to have their government subsidies removed, or worse, they were threatened with their lives. In some instances, the militant would have community sign sheets without a head, only for the community to find out later that they were announced on the radio as MPA supporters and surrendered. There was an instance when the 54th Infantry Battalion soldiers put a rice sack over a peasant and brought him to the police station and had him sign a document that he could not read. It was a document stating that he was surrendering as an NPA. The military soldiers placed a rifle in front of him and took a picture to document their ridiculous claim. It was left to silence anyone from joining or supporting the NPAs. Militarized communities had to contend with soldiers' antisocial vices like drinking that would lead to sexual harassment of women, womenizing, propositions of marriage, even though soldiers themselves were married. And in one case, in 2011, Captain Danilo Malin of the 86th Infantry Battalion courted a minor 16 years old, a senior in high school. Her name was Katrina, not her real name. She was given money, cell phone, and a watch. And from that, after 3 months, he started to court her best friend, Isabel, not her real name. And from that, he brought her to Manila and then to Ifugao to the army detachment, where the family texted her for 4 days and she didn't respond. After the 4 days, she arrived back home, dazed and confused. When she went under a medical exam, they found multiple semen in her. She was raped multiple times by soldiers. And that wasn't the only case. It happened again when the 86th Infantry Battalion was changed to the 54th Infantry Battalion. And in 2014, one of the soldiers raped another minor. And again in 2018, when that soldier raped that minor, after 3 months, he went back to apologize and raped her again. And instead of punishing them when the family sued, the army coddled them in the headquarters of the 5th Infantry Division, the mother unit of both the 86th Infantry Battalion and the 54th Infantry Battalion in Cabo Isabela, in Camp Melchor de la Cruz, which is one of 9 US bases in the Philippines. And to say that they are just countering China is a lie because it is landlocked. There's no way that that base can be used to counter China. It will be used to train the Filipino soldier to conduct counterinsurgency and surveillance on the Filipino people. The US soldiers who trained the Philippine Army are no different. In 2005, there was a campaign for justice for Nicole because she was raped by Daniel Smith, a US Marine, and while 3 other Marines watched and cheered on, he was convicted and charged for 40 years. But uh, she retracted her testimony and was offered by the US State Department to come to the US, but we cannot blame the victims for wanting better life. In 2014, trans woman Jennifer Malday was killed by Scott Pemberton for finding out that Jennifer Lawley was not biologically a woman. She, she was drowned in the toilet and was eventually convicted for manslaughter, which, well, she would, he was charged with murder, but it was downgraded to manslaughter and was convicted for 10 years. But President Duterte in 2020 pardoned Scott Pepperton and allowed him to walk free in exchange for U.S. military arms. Other violations include government soldiers stealing peasant livestock and crops. If a community was seen as a communist supporter, they were bombed and strafed with artillery fire. The internationally restricted white phosphorus bomb was even dropped, burning the indigenous people's communal forests for days and exacerbating the climate crisis. The same white phosphorus bombs dropped in Gaza that burns through flesh and bones. And since 2011, IPM members and myself have been on the receiving end of threats, harassment, and intimidation from state security forces. William Bugatti, who was our organization's human rights officer, was politically vilified by the Philippine Army in 2012. On March 25, 2014, William was gunned down on his way home after assisting political prisoners in a court hearing. After William Bugatti was killed, I was appointed as the human rights officer by the Ifugao Prison Executive Committee to assume the duties and responsibilities of William. Because I protested alongside indigenous communities for their right to self-determine what kind of development they see as appropriate, as well as document human rights violations by foreign corporations at the 54th Infantry Battalion as the IPM's human rights officer and as a journalist, wrote about the daily attacks indigenous peoples have faced, harassment against the Ifugao peasant movement and I by state security forces has intensified and escalated. Memes on social media have been released twice a week for a period of a year, politically vilifying me and 10 members of the Ifugao peasant movement. These facts are borne and acknowledged by the U.S. State Department through its annual report in 2015. My mom contacted the State Department to assist in my case. The representative joked to my mom that they should just place a bag over my head and extract me back to the United States for my safety. I was livid at the U.S. representative's response as that was happening to Filipinos protesting all over the country. On April 19, 2015, 10 members of the Ifugao peasant movement, including myself, were given a death threat and harassed in the form of the image of the gogong, the Ifugao burial blanket for the dead, with the California idiom, gray May, June gloom, no sky July, delivered in a brown envelope to a store next to the Ifugao peasant movement office. The envelope I received was addressed with my name on it and my address, NorCal, signifying that I am under heavy surveillance. For most people, do not know the term NorCal in the Philippines. The Ifugao peasant movement were placed under surveillance by state security forces, tailed and followed. They watched our office and homes. In 2017, a military agent took pictures and videos of our Ifugao delegation prayer circle prior to going to the People's Cordillera Day in Kalinga. I grabbed the military agent's phone and asked him to delete the photos and videos. He denied that he took any and left. On our way to the Cordillera Day venue, we were stopped at a joint military and police checkpoint where there was no cellular service. The police asked me to get off the bus because they received top level intelligence that I was carrying a gun and bullets. Despite illegally searching my bag without a search warrant, they were unable to find what they were looking for, except for mine and my daughter's clothing. By 2018, we observed the heightening of surveillance and the increasing frequency reports of harassment, intimidation from our members, even in social media. During this period, state agents took our pictures at our office homes, as well as tricycle, jeep, and bus terminals, wherever we went on field work or left town center. There were flyers distributed attacking the Cordillera People's Alliance, distributed in our communities, suggesting that I am an MPA recruiter. Leaflets and flyers bearing my name and face suggesting that I am a terrorist were spread all over the respective communities where we reside on social media. At this point, I had already trained my daughter what to do if something were ever to happen to me. I had braced my family, instructed them what was going on. This is something that all activists who are under attack have to do. Those with families, we have to prepare. At the end of 2018, President Duterte signed Memorandum 70, forming the National Task Force to end local communist and armed conflict. At the end of 2017, he already ended the peace talks that would solve so much of the problems of the Filipino people. And why there's an armed conflict, why people are fighting for their rights and welfare. In 2019, the military had already started visiting our homes and office. When my daughter got dengue and I was in the hospital with her for a week, they had gone to my office. They were asking about me, how much I was making, what my role as a movement is, if I would be able to train them on human rights. When they already have the government commission on human rights to do that work for them. In May of 2019, the Regional Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict in Northern Luzon designated Ifugao as a priority area to be neutralized. They looked for the local, what they call white area legal mass movement, identified to support the MPA rebels, which for them was the Ifugao peasant movement. In July of 2019, July 30th to be specific. They had come to my home looking for me. My sister-in-law told them I'm not there. Then I went to my office, or they went to my office. I told the youth in my office that we don't have to entertain them. They knocked for 30 minutes. After an hour, uh, after they finished knocking, after that 1 hour, I had to leave the office because I had to bring lunch to my niece and to my daughter. But they were waiting for us at the waiting shed, only 20 minutes away. And I gave them two names, William Bugatti and Ricardo Mayumi, on why we did not want to partner with them. My colleagues and I were in the crosshairs of the Philippine military, specifically the 54th Infantry Battalion. I had lost two of my friends and colleagues, William Bugatti in 2014 and Ricardo Mayumi in 2018, both human rights peasant activists to the assassination by state security forces. Members of the 54th Infantry Battalion had shot me 4 times in front of my daughter and niece and family in front of my home on August 6th of 2019. The counterinsurgency plan intends to neutralize the aspirations of the Filipino people for a just peace. However, each iteration has failed miserably to silence the demand. Just like they failed miserably to silence me. After being medically evacuated back to the United States, it horrifies me to think that the bullet fragments still lodged in my body have been funded by our US tax dollars through US military aid to the Philippines. The attack against me and many other human rights activists and land defenders in the Philippines is a product of US directed counterinsurgency in the Philippines and US warmongering in the Asia Pacific. While the US prepares to wage war against its rival China, it seeks to crush the revolutionary movement in the Philippines to ensure it can exploit the Philippine military and resources in its own war. This is why we continue to see heightening US militarization in the Philippines and all along the first island chain today. It's not all doom and gloom. The indigenous peoples courageously keep fighting back. They have successfully barricaded several mining sites currently. They have halted several development aggression projects and exposed and opposed US imperialism, just as the Filipino people do today. And as you know, this week is Fleet Week, a week of touting and flaunting the naval fleet of the US imperialism. The fleet will then join the rest of the US naval fleet in San Diego before heading to Hawaii for the Rim of the Pacific, or RIMPAC, where the United States will lead 26 nations in naval war exercises, which include Israel and the Philippines. But our fight doesn't end after Fleet Week. We must continue to unite with the oppressed and exploited peoples in the US and around the world to fight against imperialist wars and support national liberation struggles. while the ruling class in the US continues to unite with fascist dictators and puppet governments around the world. The 99% of the people in the world must build a broad, anti-imperialist, united front to topple the system. To this day, the stories and sacrifices of activists and freedom fighters fuel my commitment to continue this fight. The Cordillera Mass Movement continues to paitlata, a term expressed by Kamando, the commanding officer of an MPA unit who in 2014, along with 5 other Red fighters and 2 civilians, were massacred in cold blood. Kamando was caught alive and tortured before being executed by the Philippine military. Paglata means to dare to struggle, continue to fight, and fight to the end. And that's what I intend to do. Paglata. This tour is called Fight Like Brandon Speaking Tour. But I say it's fight like the Filipino mass movement, fight like the Igorot mass movement, build solidarity with the indigenous and peasant people. Let us fight for health, education, and housing. Let us be creative in dismantling US imperialism. Let us fight to end US-backed war crimes. Fight Lata. Thank you.
More for Brandon.
Can y'all hear me? Okay. Thank you so much to Brandon for your powerful words. You had me teared up at certain points. Thank you for sharing your firsthand experience of both the state-sanctioned violence and also the beautiful people's resistance that comes along with it. We're so honored to have you here as part of your speaking tour. As Brandon shared about the importance of solidarity, we wanted to ensure that today's program included a panel with comrades representing various organizations fighting for national liberation in their homeland.